Deputy Prime Minister is here with us. Back home, inflation record highs. What are we going to do about it?
Well, first of all, we've got to make sure we've got the strength and the fundamentals of our economy, which Rishi Sunak is doing. The investment is coming in. There are all sorts of things which show that this economy, the basics are right. In relation to inflation itself, I think that's one of the reasons why we've put such emphasis on restraint in relation to the public sector pay and some of the strike action we've seen, because we know that if public sector pay keeps going up, then it will only keep inflation high for longer. We are facing a global struggle against inflation. If you look at the UK figures, they're broadly comparable to the US, or in Europe, the Dutch and the Belgians, and it's going to be difficult. And we really do understand the pressure that those on low incomes are facing at the moment. They're struggling to make ends meet. That's why there's a £15 billion package of support, rebate £400 on energy bills, cutting national insurance next month. But we do need to have the kind of pay restraint in the public sector that we've been talking about, and which is at the heart of the challenge with the unions and RMT and the strikes we're facing. Otherwise, we'll just have the vicious cycle of inflation staying higher for longer.
So what happened to the PM saying last October, I've got the guts to make us a high-wage country?
Well, that's why we've increased the national living wage. So for those eligible workers, they've got £1,000 more. In relation to those particularly reliant on universal credit but are in work, they'll get an extra £1,000. And we want to go further and faster, but we've got an immediate global challenge in relation to inflation, very much sparked by the combination of the aftershocks of the pandemic as the economies around the world have got going again, but also particularly in relation to energy, fuelled by Russia's appalling invasion of Ukraine. And we've got to deal with that alongside those broader long-term initiatives.
So a high-wage country, but restraints on public sector pay, how does that square?
Because if we don't have those restraints, inflation will go higher for longer, and that will only undermine the pay packages of workers, particularly the most vulnerable workers, for a longer period of time. We are taking the action, we're taking a firm line with, for example, the RMT unions, precisely because we want to protect this erosion of pay packets by inflation. And I'm afraid if we keep seeing increase in those wages, it will create a vicious cycle which will hurt them. What RMT are doing, I think at one level for the unions, I do understand they feel their job is to protect their workers, and I understand that, but it is totally counterproductive if we follow, for example, Network Rail in the negotiations with the unions, the 3% offer. The unions are saying it must be 7%. That will only undermine the lowest paid workers' salaries for longer. And we've got to understand that vicious cycle, and we've got to avoid it.
Grant Shapps told me yesterday that the government was staying out of it.
Well, I'm just explaining to you the position. It's absolutely right, and historically, under successive governments, Network Rail and the other rail employers are the ones that engage directly with the unions. But of course, there's overall ministerial accountability for the mandate. But yes, in terms of the negotiations, that's right. That's for Network Rail to conduct.
So given that, why doesn't the Transport Secretary get in the room with them and sort it out?
Well, do you know what? It's interesting. I'm pretty sure I heard the RMT leader saying that he didn't want to sit down with Grant Shapps.
He said he didn't say it.
Well,
I asked him yesterday.
I'm afraid, I think this is why this risks being politicised. Actually, the successive approach of governments is to have Network Rail dealing with the technical aspects of that in the room, and I think that would hopefully increase the chances of if I can say, a depoliticised approach and resolution, which we do want to see.
How long are you going to let the strike go on for?
We can't allow, I'm afraid, the unions in this very militant way that they've proceeded to win this argument, because it will only hurt the poorest in our society.
Why is it militant? They're exercising their democratic right to strike.
Well, I think, look, let me tell you why. I think there's been a £16 billion package funded by the taxpayer, the very people who are suffering as a result of this disruption to trains. That's £600 per household in this country. And I think the response, and that's to see the rail industry and all those workers through tough times during the pandemic. I think, and of course, after the pandemic, we need reforms.
But why is it militant?
Because, well, let me explain. Because of the passenger that people at the home, the work-life balance is changing, people are working more from home, and also, frankly, there's some practices that were outdated that needed to change, and to run the railways efficiently, that's absolutely right. And I think given that big bailout that the taxpayer put in, I think a lot of people will feel that they are irresponsible, the unions and RMT
Doesn't
in
make them
particular.
militant, though.
Well, actually, I think because saying that you can't win in this negotiation and then disrupting millions of people, including students who are trying to go and sit their exams, including... And by the way, Kay, it is always when we have these strikes, particularly when we're talking about the trains, that the blue-collar workers suffer the most, the people that clean...
Well, they know that, but they've still voted to strike.
Well, the RMT members have, but in broader, and that's just rail workers, but I'm just saying, the cleaners, the electricians, those who cannot work remotely, like many white-collar workers can using Teams, these are the ones that are being disrupted the most. So again, I understand why unions feel that they've got to fight the corner of their sectors, but it is the lowest paid who suffer the most from strike action, and also, if we give in to this inflationary spiral that the unions' demands would lead to.
Mick Lynch spoke to me yesterday and said that he was appealing to other unions for coordinated multi-sector strikes for months to come. It's going to be your summer of discontent.
We've got unemployment at record lows, lowest levels since I was born in 1974. The fundamentals of the economy are strong. We do understand all of those pressures on workers, particularly for the next year with inflation high. But if we want to get inflation down quicker, we cannot relent. And I think on these demands...
So you're happy to take on the unions head on?
I always want to avoid conflict if I can, but I think we've got to protect the public and the lowest paid, and that means not allowing a vicious cycle of higher inflation for longer. That is an argument that we must stand firm on.
You're responsible for criminal barristers in your job as Justice Secretary. They want 25%.
Well, I think it's regrettable that they voted for strike action. Actually, it's only 43.5% of the CBA members balloted who supported these specific additional measures. Just to give you a clear understanding, we've already committed to a 15% fee uplift, £135 million going in. The typical criminal barrister will see an increase of £7,000. I'm introducing this regulation, it's a statutory instrument, next month. I don't think that it's the right thing to do. And I think if the CBA leadership couldn't convince over half of its membership to take these specific measures, I don't think the public will be convinced.
So they're not going to get 25%?
No, they'll get 15%, as I've already made clear.
OK. Let me talk to you about Bill of Rights. What's the need for this new Bill of Rights that you've been writing about in the papers this morning when we've already got the European Convention on Human Rights and the Human Rights Act in effect?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've got a proud tradition of liberty in this country. We want to reinforce the quintessentially UK freedoms, particularly freedom of speech, which we've seen whittled away in various ways. We think that that is the liberty that guards all the others. At the same time, we've seen a lot of elastic interpretations of human rights, particularly fuelled by the Human Rights Act, sections 2 and 3. I won't go into all the detail. And we think it's right to have a proper separation of powers. The UK Supreme Court should do what it says on the tin and be supreme in the legal interpretations. And if the goalposts shift, and you'll remember the whole context around prisoner voting, where we were told that we had to give prisoners the vote, I think Parliament should have the last word when it comes to the law of the land. And what our reforms will do, as I said, strengthen free speech, but curb the abuses. For example, the ability of serious foreign criminals convicted of custodial offences to frustrate their deportation on, frankly, pretty spurious grounds.
Don't European court rulings remain binding, though?
No, so there's 3 contexts. One, in the context of case law, there's no reason why, as a matter of law, international or domestic, we need to our courts need to follow the Strasbourg case law. We'll make that clear. Secondly, when it comes to individual rulings, of course, we're signatories of the ECHR. We're staying in the ECHR. I think that's important. The ECHR will remain incorporated. Well, we will, of course, when the goalposts shift, and prisoner voting is the example, when what the Strasbourg court is ultimately engaged in is judicial legislation, I think for that, we're right to make clear, as we did in prisoner voting, that Parliament has the last word on the law of the land. I think that's a sensible approach. And, of course, the Strasbourg court, particularly under Robert Spano, its current president, has talked a lot about the margin of appreciation for domestic institutions.
But the rulings remain binding.
Well, it's a matter of international law. If you get an adverse ruling against you, of course, they're binding. But what is also allowed within the margin of appreciation, where you feel that they're wrong, is to push back. It is a totally legitimate thing to press back, to avail ourselves of the margin of appreciation. Okay. And prisoner voting shows that does not lead to us being kicked out of the Council of Europe. I remember in 2015, I went to Strasbourg. Everyone told me we'd get kicked out of the Council of Europe if we didn't give prisoners a vote. We didn't. We're still in. And we've got one of the best records of compliance.
Let me ask you this then. You say the bill will boost freedom of the press. Does that chime with number 10 intervening to get a Times article removed about the Prime Minister's wife?
Look, I don't know the specifics around that, but what I can tell you is we want to see the judge-made privacy law curtailed. We think free speech in this country is something which should have a higher pecking order over, for example, the Article 8 right to privacy. Okay, we also want to protect journalistic sources. And I think, frankly, Kay, you know as a journalist, and a lot of people have talked about this, there's been a feeling, whether it's political correctness, whether you call it wokery, whatever the language, is that the scope for rambunctious but legitimate debate has been narrowed. I think our Bill of Rights will strengthen the space for those debates. OK, the Chair of the Common Standards Committee, Chris Bryant, says it's manifestly corrupt to appoint your lover as a special advisor. What would you say to him? I don't think that's what's happened. I think that's particularly irresponsible language. And frankly, these attacks on Carrie, I think, are deeply unsavoury. It didn't happen because it would have been corrupt if it had happened. Well, look, the allegations that have been made, and I've read some of the newspaper reportings, it's been roundly responded to as flawed. Those are matters for number 10 for Carrie to answer. But frankly, I think what you're seeing is a political attack on Carrie as a means to get the Prime Minister, and I think that's out of order. Well, Lord Guy says the situation is ripe for investigation. Well, look, as I say, I don't know the individual circumstances. The Prime Minister, Carrie... You respect Lord Guy's views, don't you? Of course I do, but I'm just saying I think that they've been very clear, number 10's been very clear that these claims are flawed, so has Carrie. Why not just have the investigation and it clears everything up? But well, actually what we've seen, and we've seen it on other things, there's a sort of feeding frenzy on everything or anything that is even thrown out there as a claim against the Prime Minister, or in this case his wife, and I think that's wrong. OK, but why not just have the investigation and it's all cleared up? Well, who's calling... I mean, Lord Gate is no longer in that position. There's going to be a successor. You said you respect his views. Yeah, of course I do. That doesn't mean that... there's lots of people whose views I respect, but ultimately the number 10 has been very clear on this. And as I said, I think it's a partisan attack, and I think it's very unfortunate that Carrie is being used to attack the Prime Minister. That's not on. OK, we're almost out of time. How did it fit for you earlier on in the week for size being Prime Minister again, even for a short time? Do you know what? I don't get particularly overawed by any of that. I'm there to do a job to support the Prime Minister when he needs me. And, you know, we've got a great cabinet. Everyone knows what they're doing. And I'm really happy to hold the reins if necessary. Sounds like a leadership pitch to me. No, not at all. I mean, I've said before I won't stand again. Well, I actually remember Michael Gove saying that to me. And then he stood again. Yeah, I'm not quite in the same position as Michael, but look, I can only tell you what I said before. OK. We won't have to play this to you in a year's time? No. When you're standing? No, because the Prime Minister will be poised to win the next election. Just in at the end there. It's always great to see you. Thanks so much, Lee, for joining us. Thank you.